So in this video, I'm going to go over the shaders. Just loading up the scene that I loaded up last time with just all the pre-made models we have. So in this scene, all of these models use the four different shaders that we have. These two use the texture light. These two use the normal color, and this sphere also uses the normal color. This uses the normal texture, and this one uses the color light. So if I back it up, you see there's four different colors. This is the fog effect. There's four different colors and each one corresponds with a shader. And for the light shaders, I only have a directional light for both. I don't have any point or spotlights. In the final scene, I do have point and spotlights, but for just for this simple one, it's just the directional light just to show the lighting. And so as for where they're managed, so here, right here. To create any of the shaders, we need the device to create them, and then here for the light shaders, where I set the directional light. And then each of the shaders can have fog parameters set to them, and if no fog parameters are set, um, then the fog effect won't happen. So I'll just show. So for the texture light, none of the textured light objects will have any fog effect on them as I back up. And by now they would have turned gray since the other ones turned color. And then if I have no light, it still works fine. But if the object's not within um, a point or spotlight, or there is no directional light, it's just going to be black since there's no light hitting it. This makes sense. So yeah, like I said, fog for all the shaders. Only the light shaders have can set light parameters for them. And I'll just show in the final scene. Here, set spotlight parameters, and like I said, you can have up to three. Um, it just requires an index to set the specific spotlight, and it doesn't have to be sequential. Like I could change this to 1 and 2, and it would still work fine, even if I never set 1 for the first spotlight index. And then for the point light should be up here. Yep, point light, same thing. It just requires an index to set it before you set all the other parameters for it. So go through the shaders. So here is the optimized color shader that we have. Actually, I'll go over the shader base first. So here's the shader base we were given. All the shaders have their own. All the shaders need a vertex, pixel shader, and vertex layout. Um, they all set to context the same way. Um, that's really what's common between all the shaders. So here's creating it from based off of the file. So here, yep, right here is where we get the vertex shader and pixel shader based off of the uh, .hlsl file, creating the input layout for it, and so on, setting it to context. So yeah, that's all common to all the shaders, and as for specific shaders set up their own constant buffers and anything else that would be unique to them. So as for the color, optimized color shader we got, it takes in a world in color. For example, the texture shader doesn't take in a color, so it wouldn't have that function. So yeah, these would be all unique functions. All these functions would be unique to the shader, um, except I guess for the fog parameters, but it's all set for them anyways. So yeah, each shader has their own structs that correspond with a constant buffer to them. So for the color optimized, I have one that holds the world view and projection matrix, the inverse of the world matrix, and a color, its constant buffer, and for fog parameters, which is the same across all the shaders. Got a fog start, range, color, and the position, the basically the position of the camera, its constant buffer, and this is just a matrix to hold the view and projection, just so we don't have to keep calculating that whenever the world gets sent. So yeah, here's its unique input layout, creating the constant buffers, sending the world just updates the constant buffer, and then when you send the camera matrices once, calculates it once, and then only when the world's sent is that uh, calculated. So that's why I'm holding the view projection as its own thing. And then just setting it to context, setting the buffers for the vertex and pixel shaders. Here's where I set the fog. And then when you actually send it, okay, and go into the shader itself. So here is the shader. So here is the instance data, which corresponds to this WVP color struct, and the fog parameters, and then the a struct for the vertex shader output. Here's the vertex shader, takes in the position from the vertex, puts into world space. And then here's the pixel shader, and here's where I compute the fog density, um, and just add that to the selected color for the object to determine the fog. So that would be for the color optimized, and for the color light. So here's where you can set the light parameters and the fog parameters. And since it's a light, it requires a material, and it also gets sent the world matrix. It's input layout, creating the buffers again, setting the cam like normal, and then here's setting the. Actually, I forgot to go over this. So yeah, I have a light count of 3. Here's the material for the object. Um, Here's for the ambient, diffuse, and specular for the fog illumination. Struck for the directional light, point lights, spotlights, cam matrices, the world and material, and then data light for all of the point spot for all the lights, and then the fog. So back to this. Here is where we set the directional light, given the direction, ambient, diffuse, and specular. And same thing with the point lights, except now the point light needs a position, attenuation, and a range. Spotlight requires a direction in addition to position, attenuation, range, and a exponential. And not sure why that's. Yeah, I was working fine, so that's not sure why that's coming up as a warning or an error. Yeah, that's fine. I just ran the scene. I didn't change anything to it, but yeah. Here's where we send light and fog. And like I said, if the user doesn't specify any light or fog parameters, it doesn't matter. It'll run fine, but without any light, it'll appear dark. Without any fog, it just won't, the fog effect won't take place. And just setting the world in material, just updating constant buffers and setting it to context. As for the shader texture, it's pretty similar. The only difference is instead of taking in a color, it takes a texture, a pointer to a texture. Um, that's really the only difference. And the input layout now has a text coordinate to it. Just creating the buffers, setting the context. So, where is it? So yeah. here where the texture for the shader gets set, and then when the where is it? Uh, Missing it. Well, yeah, the texture gets set. Oh, right here. Duh. So the texture gets set to context when the set texture resource and sampler gets called. That's really the only difference. It just doesn't take in a color like the other color shaders. And then the texture light, similar to the color light, except now it just takes in a texture instead of a color. Everything else is similar to the other color light shader. I'll go through the actual classes. Forgot to. So yeah, here I have the cam data, instance data, and then the fog parameters. Here's the new text coordinate for the input layout. Everything else is still the same. Compute fog the same way. Um, Actually, I forgot to change that. But yeah, this is just computing the fog. And then for the texture light, and I'll go with the color light as well. But here are the some structs for material, the Phong ADS. Is just calculating the effects of light on the pixels. And then for the multiple lights, oh, and then one thing I forgot to mention for the lights, not only does it requires a normal to properly show the lighting, but in the pixel shader for the multiple point and spotlights, I just have a for loop that loops 3 times for each point and spotlight and adds to the ambient, diffuse, and specular, and then just adds it to the pixel like normal. And same with the color light. So everything else is the same in here, except in the pixel shader, instead of taking sampling from a texture, it just gives from a color that was selected. Everything else is the same in it, the same for loop. Yep. Okay, and that would be it for the shaders.